The vault room smelled like burned insulation and old promises. Mac stood in front of the digital ledger with his arms crossed and the morning's grease still packed into the knuckles of both hands. The display stretched 3 meters wide, a wall of shifting numbers, currency tickers, and exchange rates, all of them bleeding red. The Counsel credit had been worth 6.3 standard hydrogen units to the exchange when he'd gone to sleep. He watched it tick down through 5, through 4. The station's backup generator filled the silence like a second heartbeat, low, industrial, stubborn. Chen stood to Mac's left. His holographic ledger was already open, legal clauses suspended in the air like frozen guillotines. Auditor Vane materialized on the holoprojector at the far end of the table. Silk robes, the permanent expression of a man who had been manicured rather than born. His floating desk positioned at an elevation that required everyone else to look up at him. Vane folded 4 of his hands together. The Galactic High Council has remitted payment in full for the Scaffold Protocol project. 47 trillion Council credits, transferred as of 0900 station time. The pause that followed was calibrated. The debt is settled, in legal tender. The ticker hit 2.1 hydrogen units, then 1.8. Mac moved to the physical gauge mounted on the wall, an SEU flux meter, brass and steel, built to look like something out of a machine shop because it was something out of a machine shop. He tapped it twice. The needle swung up, held for a moment, and dropped back. "You thought you were paying us in paper, Vane." The words came out flat and patient, the way a man reads a torque specification. "We're billing you in Joules, and currently, your entire central bank doesn't have enough kinetic energy to toast a slice of bread." Vane's composure cracked at the corner. Just the corner. "The contract stipulates payment in Counsel." Chen cleared his throat. The sound had the quality of a judge's gavel wrapped in imported fabric. One hand reached into the holographic ledger and extracted a single clause, magnified to fill the room. Page 4012 of the original Scaffold Protocol Agreement. Footnote 17, Subclause C. The Standard Energy Unit Parity Clause. Chen's voice was perfectly level, each word placed with the rhythm of a bill of particulars being read into the record. All compensation is denominated in the energy equivalent required to displace 1 metric gigaton at 0.1 light speed. Technically, Auditor Vane, you have not paid us in credits. You have paid us in a promissory note that now equates to approximately the thermal output of a lukewarm cup of tea. A pause. 1 second, measured. We will need the rest in hydrogen. The ticker hit 0.4. Vane's robes shifted. The floating desk recalibrated its elevation. This is a creative and illegal interpretation of... Mac pulled a battered datapad from his hip and slid it across the physical table. Actual paper printout clipped to the back, a greased thumbprint in the upper corner. 47 trillion credits at current exchange buys enough energy to run a campfire for 6 minutes. You owe us the energy equivalent of 3 stellar displacements. That means you owe us 3 solar systems worth of potential energy. The datapad sat between them. We'll start with the hardware. The first garnishment drones went active at 1400 hours, and nobody on the docking ring noticed until the magnetic clamps were already seated. They were built from scavenged Council combat frames, broad blocky machines that moved with the deliberate efficiency of something that did not get tired and did not negotiate. Mac had milled the override chassis himself, fitting each unit with a forward-mounted dispenser loaded with notice of pending seizure placards printed in 642 galactic scripts. The drones moved through the neutral zone trading hub in pairs, methodical as customs officers on their last day before retirement, attaching yellow-orange holographic boots to the landing struts of every Council trade vessel on the manifest. Admiral Krell's voice came through the docking authority channel like a pressure vessel failing at the seam. "Remove those machines from my ships, now, or I reduce them to scrap." Mac was already at the observation window, a mug of real coffee in hand, watching the Admiral's destroyer hang 300 meters off the docking ring. He keyed the channel. "Go ahead, Admiral. Delete that drone." One long sip before continuing. "I've always wanted to see what happens to a trade route when the GPS signal is legally revoked." Silence on the channel. The kind of silence that means someone is doing arithmetic they don't like. Chen supplied the clause without being prompted. Each unit is a contractually protected entity under Sovereign Scaffold Safety Statute 11-7. Destruction of a safety monitoring unit triggers an automatic shutdown of all human-maintained navigation beacons in this sector. 43% of active warp transitions depend on those beacons. A brief pause, precisely placed. "Liability-wise, Admiral, you would be legally responsible for every ship that exits hyperspace into a moon." The destroyer did not fire. The drones kept moving. By 1600, 112 Council vessels were legally immobilized in a port they had entered freely 3 hours earlier. Through the observation glass, Mac watched a cargo hauler captain lean out of his cockpit, look at the orange boot on his landing strut, and sit back down very slowly. The air in the docking ring tasted like recycled fuel and the specific anxiety of a workforce that had heard rumors all morning and did not like any of them. The drones had cost 11,000 credits each to build. The ships they had locked down were valued at 600 billion. It was a start. Xylar 4 did not look like a prize. It looked like what it was, a refueling station built by accountants trying to save money, bolted together from surplus grid panels and welded into a rotating cylinder that generated just enough gravity to function and not enough to feel comfortable. The corridors smelled like processed fuel and alien sweat. Mac led the boarding team through the maintenance hatch on the station's port side. 6 humans in vacuum-rated coveralls, each carrying a tool bag. No weapons. The station master met them in the junction corridor with 4 security officers and the expression of a man who had been hoping this was a drill. "You have no authority to—" Mac was already past him, moving toward the reactor corridor, navigating from the blueprint he had memorized on the shuttle over. He held out one hand without breaking stride. "Master key." "Master?" The engineer behind him produced a CNC-machined override key, milled to within 2 microns of the GSK station controller's proprietary fitting. 4 seconds to slot it in. The corridor lights shifted from white to yellow. The station's OS reclassified the boarding team as authorized maintenance personnel. Every door on the level opened. The station master turned to stare at the key in the controller. "That is a proprietary locking standard. The tolerance on that fitting is 400 Hertz. Mac had the reactor housing panel off before the sentence was finished. He crouched, examined the primary fuel processor coupling, heavy-duty industrial fasteners, standard flange mount, and held out one hand again without turning. 12mm torque wrench. The sound that followed was the sound of an economy being disassembled. The deep, patient screech of high-torque industrial hardware biting into fittings that had never expected to be touched, ringing off the corridor walls and echoing back from somewhere deeper in the station where the staff was beginning to understand what was happening. Mac glanced back at the station master once. "We're not pirates, son. We're the bank, and we're here for the furniture." Council security arrived 18 minutes later. By then, the primary fuel processors were loaded on the shuttle, tagged, photographed, and logged as partial payment against the outstanding SEU balance. The station was worth more empty than full. By the time Vane's fleet arrived to reclaim Xylar 4, Chen had already filed the habitat declaration. Mac sat in the former station master's chair with a cup of tea balanced on the console beside him, watching the fleet arrangement on the long-range display. 11 ships. Clean formation. The kind of display of force that was meant to communicate inevitability before a single word was spoken. Vane's projection materialized in the center of the bridge. Robes immaculate. Composure working harder than usual. "You are occupying Council sovereign property. You will vacate this installation within 1 standard hour or face. Chen did not look up from his ledger. Vane, you can't shoot us. We're endangered subcontractors now. Check Article 4, subsection, too big to fail. The silence that followed had texture. Chen turned to the next clause, his finger moving along the text. Under Counsel Statute 14 Alpha, any structure housing more than 6 non-native biological entities engaged in active infrastructure maintenance is classified as a protected habitat. We have 9 personnel aboard, all actively maintaining life support systems. He finally looked up. You cannot cut power, sever supply lines, or initiate hostile action against a protected habitat without completing a 300-year environmental impact assessment. We have filed for one. We expect the first progress report sometime around your great-great-grandchildren's administration. Through the viewport, 11 warships hung in space like very expensive, very impotent sculptures. The station's hull creaked in the ambient vibration of their drives, a low note that moved through the deck plating and into the soles of Mac's boots. Chen tapped his ledger one final time. Also, we have invoiced the Council for the fuel your fleet consumed traveling here. It has been added to the outstanding SEU balance. He closed the ledger. At current exchange rates, that is approximately another gas giant. The fleet did not fire. The fleet did not leave. They sat there, burning fuel, running the bill higher, while Mac finished his tea. The Council had arrived to evict a contractor and discovered he was holding the deed to a fortress built from their own laws. And somewhere in the accounting, the SEU balance ticked upward, not down. Warp Gate Alpha 9 was the size of a city lying on its side. The energy rings were 1/2 kilometer thick, and the color of captured lightning, rotating in a precise 3-beat rhythm that had not changed in 900 years. From a distance, it was the most beautiful thing in the sector. It processed 4.7 billion tons of freight per standard month. 38 inhabited systems depended on it for medical supply chains alone. Mac arrived with a maintenance lien and a tool bag. The Council Port Authority captain met the shuttle at the secondary docking arm, backed by 8 guards in full combat dress, and the specific expression of a man who has been briefed that something is a bluff and is now suspecting it is not. This facility is a Council strategic asset. You have no maintenance authority here. Mac unfolded the lien document from his jacket. Actual physical paper, because physical paper was harder to digitally countermand mid-dispute, and held it up briefly before refolding it. Your cooling system runs on necro coolant, specifically batch 743 of Old War surplus stock, which we supplied under the Scaffold Protocol. He tapped the relevant clause with one finger. Paragraph 19. Any proprietary material under active service agreement requires quarterly certification from the supplying contractor. You are 11 quarters behind. The paper went back in his jacket. I am here for the inspection. The inspection is not scheduled. Mac was already moving toward the control room access. It is scheduled now. Alternatively, I can log the coolant as uncertified with the safety registry. Uncertified coolant in a warp-capable installation triggers an automatic quarantine under Interstellar Transport Directive 6. The gate shuts down until I certify it. He did not slow down. Your call. The control room access opened. The gate's coolant manifold ran along the inner ring, a pressurized network of conduit nearly 300 meters in circumference, carrying the neon-black fluid that pulsed with a faint, wrong light. The air near it was 10 degrees cooler than the rest of the facility and smelled like something from before the current age of things. The fluid doubled engine efficiency. The Council had been using it for decades and had never once asked why something 10,000 years old worked better than anything they had built themselves. Mac connected his diagnostic unit to the primary manifold port. He ran the certification check for 45 seconds, long enough to be credible, and found the deficiency he had known he would find because he had engineered it into the maintenance contract 3 years earlier. He did not announce what came next. He simply pressed the sequence. The coolant vented. It was not lethal. The fluid dispersed into a heavy bioluminescent mist, neon black and pulsing, coating every surface in the docking bay in a layer of harmless, beautiful, completely inoperable light. The gate's temperature systems screamed warnings into every console within 2 kilometers. The rotating rings slowed. The captured lightning colors stuttered and dropped to something closer to ordinary. The captain's voice came through the intercom at several notes above professional. "What have you done?" Mac was already at the control console, running the reclassification. Safety requirement. Uncertified coolant has been purged per Directive 6. The gate is now classified as inert infrastructure pending recertification. He pulled up the ownership reassignment form and signed it. As certifying contractor and primary lien holder on all necro coolant in the system, Asimov Industrial is taking the gate into protective custody for servicing. He set down the stylus. "You're not being invaded, Captain. You're being evicted from the reality folding business. Please take your personal items and exit through the airlock." The rings came to a full stop for the first time in 900 years. 3 hours later, the siphon sleds had it under tow. 4.7 billion tons of monthly freight now had nowhere to go. The bill for storage was filed within the hour. The gas giant designated Sector 7 Bravo was 4,000 kilometers of compressed hydrogen and methane hurricane, ringed by a trading lane that processed 12 billion tons of freight per standard year. From high orbit, it was a bruise on the sky, amber and brown, swirling with the slow indifference of something that predated every name ever given to it. The siphon sleds arrived at 0300, running quiet. They were brutalist machines, rusted at the joins, covered in property of Asimov Industrial stickers, applied in overlapping layers over previous stickers, the kind of equipment built to survive work rather than inspection. Each one trailed a magnetic anchor cable the width of a train car, locked to the planet's field lines, with the grip of something that understood orbital mechanics the way a vice understands metal. By the time the Council destroyer Sovereign Persistence arrived to investigate, the sleds had already extracted enough hydrogen to constitute the first installment of interest on the SEU debt. The cable tension creaked through the hull with a sound like a ship being slowly remade. Chen had filed the navigational hazard report 6 minutes before the destroyer entered the lane, citing the unauthorized magnetic field disturbance created by the destroyer's own approach vector. The destroyer's cargo insurance was processed as canceled while it was still decelerating. Mac watched the intercept on the long-range display from the forward station, eating a sandwich, checking sled telemetry between bites. The destroyer captain spent 17 minutes demanding the sleds stand down. The sleds were automated. They did not receive demands. They received work orders, and their work orders came from Mac. He finished the sandwich. The sleds finished the first extraction cycle. The destroyer, now flagged as a navigational hazard under the report it had triggered, was legally required to hold position pending sector clearance. The gas giant rotated with complete indifference. The trading lane was now a subscription service with one vendor. The recall notice went out at 0600 system-wide, filed with the Interstellar Transport Safety Registry under Human Contractor Certification Authority, Safety Recall 9C. Chen had drafted it in 20 minutes with the calm efficiency of a man writing a utility bill. The language was technical, correct, and absolutely catastrophic. All Council vessels constructed after the Scaffold Protocol contained drive components manufactured with human-certified materials. As the certifying authority, Asimov Industrial was legally obligated to recall all affected units for mandatory safety inspection. Expected inspection wait time, 42 years. Admiral Krell's response came through on the Priority Defense Channel. The priority classification told Mac how seriously they were taking it. "This is a fraudulent instrument. Our vessels are fully operational. We will not ground our fleet based on an engineered liability." Chen's hands rested flat on the table. "I'm sorry, Admiral, but your flagship has an outstanding recall on its primary drive shaft. According to the Asimov Protocol, you are legally required to remain at station until a human technician arrives. Expected wait time, 42 years. On every Council military vessel in the sector, the proprietary engines built with human-licensed components received a firmware update, not a shutdown, a vibration, 400 Hz instead of the nominal 402, enough to register as an unsafe operating condition on every automated safety monitor simultaneously, enough to make every chief engineer on every ship start running diagnostics before authorizing acceleration. The Council fleet did not stop. It slowed. A fleet that moves slowly gives up the only thing a fleet actually has. Mac watched the engagement plots narrow on the display. The Admiral's flagship spent 11 minutes running internal checks before clearing its own acceleration request. The sound of the recall reaching the dry docks came through on the monitoring channel. The flat, bureaucratic chime of every active construction permit being placed under review. 240 hulls suspended mid-build, while the registry awaited recertification documents that would take a human technician to provide. The Admiral could fight that ruling for 42 years, or he could sit down. He was still deciding which one was winning. The Ghost Fleet operation ran for 6 hours in the Kalari Nebula and cost Asimov Industrial less than the materials for a single maintenance run. Mac had milled the reflectors himself, CNC cut from seized Council hull plating, shaped to return a radar signature consistent with a Hegemony-class dreadnought. He deployed 47 of them in a dispersal pattern that read, to Council long-range sensors working through the nebula's interference like a human battle group in a holding pattern. The Council war room committed a full interdiction force. They found shipping containers. Each container carried a notice of seizure placard bolted to the forward face, a legal reference number, and a repo notice itemizing the ammunition the Council had just spent engaging it. The containers tumbled slowly in the afterwash of the engagement, massive, hollow, empty, and as of the moment of first impact, classified as salvage. While the interdiction force was realizing what had happened, 8 humans with tool bags and master keys finished securing the Council's orbital dry docks in Sector 3, 19 hulls under active construction. All 19 were now partial payment, assessed at current SEU value, logged, and appended to the ledger. The empty ammunition crates that drifted out of the nebula were recovered and logged separately. The invoice for salvage processing went out before the force captain filed his incident report. The High Council war room had gone quiet in the specific way of rooms where everyone understands the meeting is going badly, but the official position is that it isn't. Vane stood at the center display, which was cycling through asset status reports. The warp gate, gone. The 3 refueling stations, gone. The gas giant's solar wind rights, filed under human provisional claim. 17 dry dock berths in escrow. The tracking display for the interdiction force still showed the Ghost Fleet coordinates, overlaid now with the salvage claim numbers that were being appended to them in real time. The decision to default through military action took 4 hours to reach and felt decisive to the people in that room. Mac heard about it in 12 minutes. Chen was already at the transfer desk, composing without urgency. We have factored the debt. His stylus moved across the document at a pace that suggested this was entirely routine. Sold the outstanding SEU balance to a third-party collection entity. The Gorgon Hegemony accepted it at 60 cents on the Joule. He signed. We are no longer the primary creditors. Technically, we are the technical consultants for whoever is. The first Gorgon collection vessel entered Council space 40 minutes later. It was 3 kilometers long and carried the specific quality of silence that large things carry when they don't need to explain themselves. Mac watched it on the tracking display, the way it moved without hurry, without announcement, without the diplomatic preamble the Council had expected from every entity it had ever encountered. In the war room, someone finally said out loud what the display had been showing for an hour. The Council had built its military strategy around solving a problem that had already reclassified itself. The humans were not the problem anymore. The humans were the floor managers. The Council's attack on the human collection hub began at dawn by their calendar and midday by Max, which made the coffee he was drinking feel appropriate for the occasion. He watched the fleet on the long-range display, 43 vessels, a real force this time, not an interdiction probe. Hard formation. The kind of approach that communicated they were finished with bureaucratic theater and ready to solve the problem with physics. They hit the debris field at approximately the same moment they understood what it was, 300,000 tons of seized Council scrap, suspended in a precise orbital lattice by repurposed siphon sled magnetic anchors. Hull plating, drive casings, coolant conduit, navigation frames. Every piece tagged, photographed, appraised, and registered under Asimov Industrial Asset Numbers 7 through 22,840. Every piece marked with a holographic seal that read, Unresolved Collateral, Asimov Industrial Property, Do Not Destroy. The lead element fired. Mac watched the impacts register. His datapad chimed twice. Then again. Chen was already on his feet, ledger open. Pursuant to the Interstellar Asset Protection Convention, destruction of registered collateral by a debtor entity triggers an insurance nullification event. All Council commercial policies in this sector are now void. His finger moved to the next line. The destroyed material has been invoiced at replacement value, plus impound fee, plus hazard premium. The invoice is larger than the cost of the attack. The fleet kept firing. The invoices kept generating. The debris field reconfigured in the engagement wake. Every piece that shifted in orbit automatically reclassified, assessed, and appended to the ledger as new collateral. The Council was shooting itself poorer in real time. It just had not stopped yet. There was something in the sensor return that Mac found himself watching. The way the scrap held its pattern even under impact. The siphon sled anchor fields redistributing load through the lattice, the whole structure absorbing kinetic energy and converting it into account receivable. He had spent 3 months building it. He had not known exactly until this moment whether it would hold. It held. The lattice sang when the larger impacts hit. Not a metaphor. The anchor cables transmitted vibration in a frequency that the station's hull translated into a low, harmonic moan, the kind of sound industrial structures make when they are doing exactly what they were designed to do under exactly the kind of stress they were designed to handle. Mac had stood in enough machine shops to know what that sound meant. It meant the tolerances were right. Debris from each impact drifted into new orbital positions, and each new position was automatically assessed and logged by the tracking system running on the station's secondary processor. Hull value, alloy composition, orbital stability rating, recovery fee, all of it appended to the growing ledger column marked additional collateral generated in default. The Council fleet was doing Mac's inventory for him. The fleet broke formation on the 9th pass and pulled back to reassess. Mac put the coffee down. Chen did not look up. I have also filed for the fuel they burned on the approach, and the fuel they will burn on the withdrawal. He turned a page. And I have filed a navigational hazard notice for the debris field they created, which will require a human-certified survey team to clear. I have estimated the survey at 340 hours at our standard contractor rate. Mac looked at the display for a moment. What's the running total? Their attack has cost them approximately 4 times more than the value of everything they hit. Chen closed the ledger. I would call that a successful engagement. The Council capital world was called Ethon Prime, and it breathed through the most sophisticated atmospheric processing grid in the known galaxy. 4 centuries of progressive engineering, maintaining the precise gas ratios its 3 billion inhabitants required to go about their lives without noticing they were breathing at all. Humans had built the latest generation of scrubbers. 18 months ago during the Scaffold Protocol as a goodwill extension, at a cost that had been itemized and billed and was now listed in the outstanding SEU debt under Infrastructure Services, line 47. The scrubbers ran on energy-gated protocols, standard contractor protection. If a client defaulted, the maintenance contract expired cleanly. No dramatic systems failure, no emergency, just a quiet, correct designed-in reduction to 50% capacity. When the payment default was formalized, the scrubbers dropped. The air did not turn toxic. It did not change color. It did not smell like anything different. It became, slowly and without announcement, stale. The particular quality of air in a room that has not been opened in a long time, in a machine doing its job at half effort, correctly, within specifications, exactly as designed. The Council Ministry of Infrastructure called Chen's line within 6 hours. Chen let it ring twice before accepting. The energy-gated maintenance protocols are functioning correctly per the service agreement. Full capacity requires current status payment. He pulled up the ledger. We are prepared to offer emergency air credits, full scrubber restoration within 4 hours, in exchange for a 24-hour processing lien on the primary mineral extraction rights for Ethon Prime's Boros Basin. He set the ledger down. Liability-wise, the alternative is a slow and entirely legal decline in atmospheric quality over the next 8 months. The ministry did not respond for 11 minutes. 11 minutes was the sound of 3 billion people breathing stale air without knowing why, and one man in a sealed government chamber doing the math on how much worse it would get and deciding whether the mining rights were worth more than the answer to that question. The ministry accepted the lien. Admiral Krell had decided the answer to bureaucracy was kinetics. It is a decision that makes a certain kind of sense if you have never met a lawyer who has already priced in the cost of your anger. The railgun discharged at 14:43 station time. The slug crossed the engagement zone in 0.8 seconds and impacted a drone classified as a contractually protected entity under Sovereign Scaffold Safety Statute 11-7. Chen issued the invoice before the impact report finished printing. That railgun slug cost you 10 billion credits in noise mitigation fees, Admiral. The ledger was open, the entry already filed with the Interstellar Trade Registry, logged as a debit against the Council's sovereign account. Would you like to put that on your tab, or should we seize another moon? Krell fired again. The invoice doubled. Mac pushed a licensing update to the targeting system. The system ran on a human-certificated fire control package that had been in service agreement violation since the Admiral missed the last quarterly payment, and the next shot missed by 30 meters. That is a breach of... Chen turned a page. Software license non-compliance. You are running the trial version of your targeting firmware. We have downgraded you automatically per the terms of the non-payment clause. He closed the ledger with the flat sound of a case being rested. Would you like to purchase the full package? We accept payment in Joules. Krell fired twice more. Both invoiced. Both missed. By 1600, his vessel had accumulated a debt load exceeding its own assessed value. It was, by every technical definition, operating at a net loss with each discharge. The guns still fired. The invoices still generated. The gap between what the Admiral believed was happening, a military engagement, and what the ledger recorded, an accelerating bankruptcy, widened with each shot. Mac watched from the tactical display, occasionally checking the engagement figures and occasionally checking the ongoing construction update from the capital system, where 11 weeks of careful work was reaching its conclusion. At 1712, Krell stopped firing. Not because anyone told him to, not because the ships ran out of power or the guns ceased, or the licensing update took his targeting fully offline. He stopped because one of his own staff officers put a calculation on his screen that showed the total value of his fleet, ships, weapons systems, munitions, fuel reserves, against the total debt accrued in the past 3 hours of engagement, and the number on the right side was larger. A fleet that is worth less than the cost of its last afternoon is not a fleet anymore. It is a liability. Mac had not fired a single shot. He had built one. The foreclosure cage took 11 weeks to assemble, and it looked, to every council observer who filed an inspection request, exactly like what the engineering submission said it was. A thermal regulation network, linking the existing Dyson-Siphon arrays through repurposed necro-coolant manifolds to cycle and disperse the excess heat load generated by the capital system's 7 inhabited worlds and 3 active shipyards. The specs submitted for council review were accurate in every detail. They did not mention what happened when the linked siphons were brought to full calibration simultaneously. Mac walked the final relay section himself, toolbag in hand, checking coupling alignment in the specific way of a man who has built something that needs to work exactly right exactly once. The siphon power feeds hummed at a frequency low enough to feel in the sternum, in the teeth, in the particular way large machines make themselves known to the body. The necro-coolant pulsed through the conduits in rhythms that did not match the station's mechanical cycle, the logic shards in the ancient fluid responding to the array's growing calibration, 10,000-year-old code initializing in the dark. Vane found him at the final relay manifold. No announcement, no floating desk. His robes were the same, but he was wearing them differently, the way a man wears formal clothing when the occasion for formality has collapsed. The waste heat project is nearly complete. Not a statement. The shape of a question wearing a statement's clothes. Mac finished the coupling check. Torquey within spec. Seal confirmed. He straightened and picked up the tool bag. "We don't need to kill you, Vane." He turned and walked back toward the maintenance lift. "We just need to put you in the dead files cabinet, and we're about to close the drawer." The array came online at 97%, 3% below full activation. The 3% you leave incomplete when you want the people living inside the device to have a few remaining hours to consider whether they intend to be reasonable. Through the relay station's external sensors, Mac watched the linked siphon ring shimmer around the capital system's star. Massive glitching circles of repurposed light management hardware, looking from a distance like someone had wrapped the sun in cracking glass. They were not a weapon. They were an enclosure. And in 3% of the control system, the key to the lock was sitting in a safety deposit box with Mac's biometric on the seal. The High Council chamber was built for exactly this kind of meeting. Tiered seating for 312 council members. A ceiling 50 meters high, painted with the full history of the Galactic Accord in colors that had been chosen to communicate the weight of institutional permanence. Acoustics designed to carry a speaker's voice with the gravity of something beyond argument. It was built to make the people inside feel like the outcome of history rather than a moment in it. Chen walked in carrying a single physical ledger. Mac walked in carrying a cup of tea. Vane was already at the high podium, flanked by 6 council arbiters in formal regalia, and Admiral Krell in dress armor that looked, in the current context, like someone had arrived at a foreclosure hearing in a parade uniform. The full council membership was present, 312 beings who had governed the known galaxy for longer than human civilization had kept written records. The room smelled of old stone and ceremony, and the particular tension of a space where everyone is maintaining composure with effort. Chen set the ledger on the table. He opened it to the last page. Total outstanding SEU debt, as of this morning. His voice moved through the designed acoustics cleanly. The energy equivalent of 2.3 stellar masses. At current collection rates, accounting for all seized assets, partial payments, and accrued interest, the Council will retire this debt in approximately 11,000 years. One breath, measured, provided they stop accruing interest, which they are currently not doing. Vane leaned forward at the high podium. The composure was present, but it was working, holding the way a structural member holds when the load has changed and the engineer hasn't been called yet. You are conducting an act of economic warfare against a sovereign governing body. The Council security force will... Mac's datapad chimed. He looked at it with the expression of a man reading a maintenance schedule. One tap on the screen. The lights went out. Not the emergency systems. Those held blue and low, exactly as the chamber's fail-safes specified. But through the observation windows that flanked the Council floor, looking out at the capital world's dayside sky, the star was gone. Not eclipsed. Not dimmed. Not occluded by anything with a physical presence. Gone. For 3 seconds, the capital world of the Galactic High Council sat in a darkness with no natural cause, looking at a sky where the star had stopped being present, with the silence of beings who have discovered that a thing they believe to be permanent is not. The lights returned. The star returned. 3 seconds. Mac set his tea down on the table. "We didn't kill your son, Vane." Each word placed with the same flat patience he used reading torque specifications, the same voice he used calling for a wrench. "We just put it in a safety deposit box. You want the key? Sign the receivership agreement." 312 council members were breathing with the specific, careful attention of beings who had just spent 3 seconds in darkness and were still counting backward from it. Vane's hands were flat on the high podium. The floating desk was not deployed. His robes had stopped moving in the way that fabric stops moving when the person wearing it has run out of performance. Admiral Krell's hand moved toward his sidearm and stopped there. He stopped because 3 members of his own security detail had quietly repositioned during the blackout. 2 degrees of shift just enough, and 2 of the 6 were wearing Asimov industrial contractor badges that had not been visible before this moment. The 3rd had been hired last Tuesday. Chen opened the receivership agreement to the signature page and moved it across the physical table. Every warp gate, Dyson array, shipyard, and navigational beacon previously operated under Council authority will transition to management by Asimov Industrial under the terms of a 2,000-year service contract. The Council will continue to govern its member worlds. It will do so within a budget approved quarterly by the board. He straightened. Per the statute, you have 1 standard hour to sign before the escrow condition becomes permanent, and we begin the 300-year administrative review process to determine whether the light is legally yours. 11 seconds of silence. Mac counted them. Vane stepped down from the high podium. His footsteps on the council floor were the only sound in a chamber built to carry sound. He walked to the table. He picked up the stylus. The signature was a very small sound in a very large room. Nobody moved for a moment after it. Not the council members in the tiered seating. Not the arbiters. Not Krell, whose hand had dropped from his sidearm to hang at his side in the posture of a man who has been carrying a weight long enough that its absence is disorienting. Mac picked up his tea. It had gone cold. He drank it anyway. Outside the observation windows, the star was still there, burning as it had burned for 4 billion years, entirely indifferent to what had just happened beneath it. The difference was the deed. 6 hours after the signing, Mac was in the former High Council Administrative Annex, which had been emptied of ceremonial furniture and restocked with the things that made a space functional. A workbench, a CNC interface terminal, a wall of asset status displays cycling through the newly acquired infrastructure, the way a new department head reads a backlog, methodically, looking for what was late and why. He had been here 40 minutes before he found Warp Gate Alpha 9's restart calibration running 3 minutes behind schedule. A knock at the door, and it opened before he answered. Admiral Krell, former admiral, logged in the Asimov Industrial Personnel System since noon as Logistics Coordination Specialist Grade 3, entered carrying 2 cups of coffee. He was still in the dress armor. There had not been time to change, or he had not wanted to. He set 1 cup on the workbench without speaking and stood at a position that was not quite attention and not quite ease. Mac looked at the display. The gate calibration ticked another second behind. He picked up the coffee. "It's a brand new day in the galaxy, Admiral." He took 1 sip, set the cup down, and picked up his calibration wrench. "Now stop standing around. That warp gate is 3 minutes behind schedule, and I'm charging myself late fees." Krell stood in the doorway for a moment, the specific stillness of a man reclassifying himself. Then he pulled out a datapad and started pulling up the gate status logs. He worked without speaking. Mac worked without speaking. The CNC interface hummed between them, and from the ventilation came the low, constant sound of the station's systems running. Environmental, power, structural, all of them functioning at full capacity, all of them doing their jobs, as systems do when someone is paying attention to the maintenance schedule. After 20 minutes, Krell spoke, his voice carrying the flat remainder of a military register that had not yet found its new register. "The Sigma 7 gate. The status log shows it has been underperforming since before I was born." Mac did not look up from the calibration display. "Bearing, 11 credits. Someone just kept rescheduling the repair." He tapped a line on his own screen. "I already fixed it, Tuesday." Krell looked at his datapad. "That gate has been listed as a priority infrastructure concern in Council reports for 60 years. 60 years of reports." Mac set down the wrench and picked up the coffee. "1 Tuesday." Krell did not respond to that. He wrote something in his datapad instead, methodically, without expression. And Mac had the sense that whatever it was not going into a Council report. It was the handwriting of a man who has stopped thinking in terms of sovereign might and is beginning, carefully, to think in terms of work orders. 3 weeks after the signing, the first sector report was filed with the Asimov Industrial Board. The Galaxy's infrastructure was running at 92% efficiency, up from 68. The remaining 8% represented systems still in legal dispute. One planetary governor who had attempted to renegotiate his fuel contract in bad faith, and Warpgate Sigma 7, which had been running behind schedule since before humans had spaceflight. The analysis showed it had been behind schedule because no one had replaced a bearing that cost the equivalent of 11 credits. Mac replaced it himself on a Tuesday, between 2 other maintenance calls. Vane was assigned to waste management, specifically the department responsible for auditing the thermal output of the phase shift array to ensure it held within treaty parameters. It required reading the SEU flux meter twice daily and filing a report. It was the most precise and technically demanding job he had ever held, and he had no authority over anything it produced. He filed every report correctly and on time. The Galaxy ran on schedule, within budget, and in the black. Not because anyone had conquered anything. Not because the Council had been broken, but because someone had sat down with the actual engineering specs and the actual legal documents and applied the same standard a machinist applies to a tolerance specification. You get what the plans call for, and if the plans are wrong, you fix the plans before you cut the material. It was a strange kind of piece, assembled from liens and ledgers and the specific audacity that looks like paperwork until suddenly it doesn't, and it held the way things hold when they are built correctly. The Gorgon hegemony, once the Council's feared third-party creditor, had been quietly brought on as a logistics partner in the new structure. They were effective at moving things and not interested in politics, which made them ideal subcontractors. They received a standard rate, filed their reports on time, and nobody had to explain to anyone that the most feared debt collectors in the known galaxy were now, technically, in middle management. Chen filed the final settlement document with the registry at noon. At noon and 1 second, he opened the next project file. The Galaxy, it turned out, needed a lot of work. It always had. It had simply never had the right contractor. He started reading. Somewhere on the capital world below, 3 billion beings were breathing clean air that ran on a maintenance contract renewed monthly on time, without drama, because the bill was paid, the specs were correct, and the bearing had been replaced. The star burned above them. They had stopped noticing it. That, too, was exactly as designed.